What's up, guys? Frontend source code here. Today, we are going to look at this library called Zustand. You're probably very familiar with it as it's one of the most popular state management library in React. In this video, we are going to look at the source code of this library to get to know the implement detail of this library. Now, before we start, I want to make sure you know what this library is for. And if you are already familiar with this, feel free to skip this section, but I'm just going to briefly go over this library's functionality. Now, in the README, we can see there is a short example. First, we create a store using this create function from Zustand. This create function takes another function as argument. And inside of this function parameter, we can return the state and also the actions like beers and increase population. Then when you want to use it, you can just use beer store to select the state or the actions you want to use. And that's just how you use it. It's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. And later in this video, you will see that the source code of this library is actually pretty simple too. Now, we go over to VS Code. We can see the structure of this library. First, we have a source folder, and inside of here, we have an index.ts, which is the entry point. And inside here, we can see it exports two files. One is from react.ts and one is from vanilla.ts. And let's go over to the vanilla.ts first. Now, in this function, there is a lot of type definition and type alias. We are not going to focus on TypeScript for this video, as we just want to make sure we understand the fundamental logic of this library. So we're just going to skip these types, this interface. There's another type. There is also another type. And we are going to the first function, which is create store implementation. This is our first function. And then we export a const create store. It actually is another function which takes a created state as parameters. And if this created state exists, then we returned a created store implementation using this create state. If it doesn't exist, we just return this create store imp function. Now let's look over the create store implementation function. It is a function that takes a parameter as created state. Inside of here, we can see it first extract two types. One is tstate and another is listener. This tstate is return type from this create state. So we can know that this create state is actually a function. So we get the return type of this as tstate. Now we get this listener as another type alias. It is a function that takes state and previous state and return a void. Both of this state and previous state is using this tstate type we extracted before. Then we declare a state variable and a const variable listeners, which is a set of listener. Now here is the main function, which is setState. It has a quite complex logic, so we are going to look over it for now. First, we can say it takes two parameters, partial and replace. In the first line, we declare a const as next state, and it checks for whether partial is a function or not. So the partial can be partial state, or it can be a function that returns partial state. As we can see here, using a type conversion, we can see that partial can be a function that takes a state and returns another state. And we just run this function with our current state. Now, here is a if logic. It checks whether the next state is equal to the current state using object.is. This object.is is checking for the object reference. So if you are creating a new state by using the same values, it's not going to be true. This is strictly checking for whether it is a same reference object. So inside of this if logic, if the next state is not the same as the current state, we are going to do this logic. Inside of here, we set the previous state as the current state, as we are going to update the state and we need to keep the previous state as a value so we can passing to the listener. Here, you can see that the listener takes two arguments. One is the current state, another is the previous state. So we are going to need this previous state here. Now, for the new updated state, here's the logic. If we have replace is, as we can see here, is a Boolean or undefined. So if this replace exists, whether it's true or false, we are going for this logic. So the question mark in JavaScript basically checks for the left side value, which is replaced here, whether it's null or undefined. If it is null or undefined, we are going to run the right side operation. If it's not, we are going to keep the left side value. So if the replace is undefined, then we are going to run the right side operation, which is checking for the next state is an object or null. So here the logic is, if replace exists and if it is true, we are going to run the next state as our new state because we want to replace it, right? If it's not true, if it's false, then we are going to do an object assign with an empty object, current state, and the next state. This is basically doing a object merge in JavaScript, this object assign, right? And then this, if we didn't pass in replace, which is going to be default as undefined, we are going to run the right side logic, which checks for whether state is not an object or state is null. So if the next state is null or it's not an object, then we are going to run the first argument, which is return next state. Because if next state is not an object, there is no way we are going to assign this. This merging algorithm just doesn't work in non-object type. Now we understand the setState logic. Let's look at the getState logic. The getState is pretty simple. It's just a function that returns the current state. Then we're going to look at getInitialState, which basically returns the initial state. And the initial state declaration is down here, which is the return value of this createState. This createState function is what we passed in, as we said in the example. This createStore function takes another function that returns the initial state. Now we have the subscribe function, which takes a listener, and we add this listener to the listener's set. We also returned a unsubscribe function as a cleanup. Now we have all the API we needed, the setState, getState, getInitialState, and subscribe. And we just return this API as a whole. Now we understand the core logic of this vanilla.ts function. Let's look at how the react.ts works. So for the react.ts file, we can see there is a bunch of type alias again. For this video, we are going to skip them. If you are interested in how these type alias works, leave a comment in the comment section below, and I will give you another video specifically for this type declaration. For the real logic, we can see here is a function called useStore, and here is another function called createImplement. And finally, we export a const called create. This is pretty similar to the vanilla.ts file. This create function takes a create state or undefined as its parameter and returns a create implement with the create state or just the create implement function itself. And for the create implement, we can see it's a function that takes a create state and it just put this create state into the create stored. And we can see that create store is actually from vanilla.ts. Here we have the most important part of this whole file, this useStore function. This function is a core logic to bind the state management of Zustand to React internal, so the React can re-render based on the changes from the store. And we can see here this useStore function. For the useStore function, we can see inside of here we take an API, which is the return of create store. Then we take a selector. If you remember from the example, the selector is basically a way to tell the Zustand or React that you only want part of the state instead of the whole state. So it's a function that takes a state and returns a state slice, which is basically a part of the state. Inside of here, we have this React.useSyncExternalStore. This is a new hooks in React that takes a subscriber function, a get snapshot, and a get server snapshot. Here we can check out for the React document for how this hook works. You can see useSyncExternalState is a React hook that lets you subscribe to an external store. It takes 3 parameters: a subscribe function that takes a single callback argument and subscribes it to the store. When the store changes, it should invoke the provided callback. So this is going to cause React to recall the get snapshot, and it can get the newest state from a external state, which in this case, the Zustand state. And the get snapshot function basically return the newest state of the external state. In our example, the get snapshot should return the newest Zustand store. And then the optional get server snapshot is going to return the initial snapshot for the server-side rendering. Now we can look at the code. The first argument we pass in is api.subscribe, which is the subscribe function. Then we pass in the get snapshot function, which in here is a use callback. And in here, it's a function that returns the selector with the api.getState. So the api.getState, using this, we can get the newest state, right? But remember here, we are not going to need the whole state. We just want part of the state. So here is the select function. We are going to put on this api.getState because we only care about this part of the state, right? We don't care about anything else. Then we need to pass the get server snapshot function, which in here returns the api.getInitialState wrapped it with selector. Then we wrap this slice with React.useDebugValue for better debugging experience. Finally, we return the slice. Then let's get back to our create implement function. Here we get our useBound store, and we just assign this API to this useBound store. This way we can bind this React state with our vanilla state as a whole. Finally, we return this useBound store. As we can see, this library is not that complex. It's actually quite simple. If you find this video helpful, please leave a like or considering subscribe to this channel. I will see you in the next video.